Okay, so the first story, there were two monks who were going by a riverside. One was a senior monk and one was a junior monk. Now, as they were walking, they saw an old lady who wanted to cross the river. But because she was old, she couldn't. So she requested one of those monks to help us cross the river. Now, the senior monk volunteered and he lifted the lady on his back. And as they were crossing the rivers, the current was very crazy. So that's why the water was splashing on them. They were being hit by different things. And as they were going, the lady was actually screaming. So when they were able to go back on the other side, the lady was so frustrated that in place of saying thank you to the monk and being appreciative of the situation, she was pretty frustrated and pretty angry with what had all happened. So then she went and these monks started walking again. And after half an hour or so, the junior monk asked the senior monk, he said, "That was a strange lady, right? Like, we were trying to help us, you helped her and picked her and whatever. And in place of saying thank you to you, she was frowning at the end of it all." And the senior monk said something very great. He said, "Oh, I dropped her half an hour before. Why are you still carrying her?" So the next story is about Gautam Buddha. Once an angry Brahmin came in and he started abusing Buddha and saying all sorts of bad things about Buddha while Buddha was there, and Buddha just kept silent. So once the Brahmin was done throwing all those garbage, Buddha asked the Brahmin, he said, "Hey Brahmin, I have a question to you. Do you have guests over at your place?" And the Brahmin said, "Yes, I do have guests over my place." And then Buddha asked, "Well, whenever you offer them food and they don't take the food, whom does the food belong to?" The Brahmin said, "Oh, well, it's my home and I was the host. So if I offer something and a guest doesn't take it, well, it belongs to me." And then Buddha said, "In the same way, Brahmin, we don't want to eat in the plate. We don't want to engage in this your hosting. We don't want to engage in your feast that you've provided. We don't want to engage in this dinner. We don't want to be part of your dining table. It's all yours, Brahmin. Take it all." Well, people have different ways of interpreting this story, but as far as I'm concerned, I think the interpretation is pretty simple. It's that when people come from the sources of toxicity and they try to, do some action and they try to engage you in it, the most intelligent and most insightful way is to not be part of the petty game. You can just let him play the game, let him win or let him surrender or whatever, but you're not a part of the game. So you are saved from all the emotion and all the roller coaster ride that you have had to experience had you been part of the game. And well, another quote that resonates with that Buddha story is from War Games, which is a strange game. The only winning move is not to play. Because, well, there are lots of manipulative games out there. There are lots of people with the baggage of toxicity that they carry from childhood issues or whatever. So the thing is, if you engage with them, it's a dirty game. Don't hope that you'll be able to be victorious in that game. The only way you can shield yourself complete, because even if you are victorious at the end, I can promise you that you're going to have so much of things to deal with at the end. So the only winning move is not to play. Well, there is another story that I have always liked, and this story is also related with the life of Buddha. This story is about a serial killer who lived in the era of Buddha. So once Buddha was walking around the town collecting alms, and he started walking on a trail that led into the woods. And the villagers came running and warned the Buddha that, well, the trail that you're trying to go, it passes through the hut of a serial killer known as Angulimala, who is a maniac, who is crazy, and he will kill you. There is no doubt about that. So Buddha, being Buddha, continued walking. And then as he came across the hut of Angulimala, Angulimala was out there standing. And as he saw Buddha walking towards him, he screamed out loud and said, "Hey monk, stop walking." And Buddha said, "I have already stopped years ago. I think you are the one that is not stable, or you are the one that's running." So, well, there are different reportings of what the exact incidence was. Maybe it was the fact that Buddha was one of the only guys that did see the human inside Angulimala that needed love. And maybe that was what touched Angulimala. So he just fell in the feet of Buddha and then he became a monk. Well, long story short, the most interesting part of the story is once Angulimala was going around the town and he saw a lady in labor and he really felt bad. He wanted to help her. But in place of helping her, he came running back to Buddha and he narrated the story. He said how he wanted to help her, but he could not. And then Buddha asked Angulimala, "Why do you say so? Why could you not help her?" And he said, "Well, I had guessed, well, maybe she would have asked me about my background, about have I ever done any crime or something like that. And I'm a monk now, so I want to be completely honest. I don't want to be in the same clutches of lies that I was at one point of my life. So I think had I told her the truth, she would have been quite startled by it. So I thought it was not appropriate for me to approach her." Well, Buddha had one of the most magical things to say. He said, "You should have told her I've never done any crime." And then Angulimala said, "Well, that's lie, right? And then Buddha said, well, not really, but if you do feel this way, then you could have said, I have never done any crime in my noble birth. Because once you became a monk, you had another birth. You were reborn, which in Sanskrit we call Dvij. Just like how a hen or any bird species is born again when it hatches from the egg. So in the same way, you are reborn. So you don't need to bother about all the things that you did. And this has a very important lesson for us all. We usually tend to, or our mind does not bifurcate the fact that the past and the present are distinct. The past is dead. The past you is dead too. I mean, when you were a teenager, you had different sensibility. Now you do have different sensibility and the future hasn't arrived. So that's irrelevant to be talking about. But the ego is a very, very strange illusion. And you need to understand why the feeling of guilt and shame exists. It has to do with evolutionary psychology. Whenever you feel pain, or whenever you get rejected, or whenever you feel insulted, or whenever you feel shamed, it is that the ego records it, because all those traits are not favorable for your health, your life, and your mating opportunities. A monkey that is shamed, or a monkey that is insulted by a tribe, or a monkey that was rejected by a potential mate, is not a monkey that will be able to procreate. So the ego records it, and the ego pressurizes you in all possible ways so that you do feel that pain as much as possible, so that you are able to learn a lesson from that opportunity and perform better the next time. So I hope you do understand where this feeling of guilt and shame and all these things come from. And this is quite natural. I mean, we are all in the human body. Ego is a part of us. It's part of the life that we have. So if ever you are lying on the bed on one of those sleepless nights and you're getting all those thoughts of maybe 4 years ago you did something very cringe, or a person who frowned on you, or the guilt that you have, or the feeling of shame or rejection, well, that's just your ego. And the ego is quite a very primitive thing. It's a very wild thing. So what you can do is just be there, and you can maybe repeat to yourself that the avatar with which that happened is long dead. Or you can also think of it just like a snake sheds its old skin. I think this is also a line that was used by Buddha. Be like the snake that sheds its old skin. It doesn't even look back. That was old. Its job is done. Now you don't need to carry that dead thing around. I mean, it had its own purpose, but that purpose is long done. Heraclitus had something similar to say. So Heraclitus said, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. Similarly, the river is what the life and the situations were at one point, and the man was what your avatar was. So don't panic about things that happened in the past, and don't feel too worried about the guilt and shame that your ego is trying to pressurize into you. This is all natural. This is evolutionary, and it's all silly, to be honest. The past is dead and there is no reason to care about it. You are the person that is getting a new birth every moment. Every day is a new day, and this is not just like some poetic thing that I'm telling you. This is also what neuroscientists believe in. Your consciousness is a result of all your neurons and how they work. And well, you have neuroplasticity, and your consciousness is made up of two things, information and integration. So information is when you look at a rose flower, you're receiving new information. And there is no way that you can have the same consciousness at 2 points, because you're having different information at every point. So I'm looking at the camera right now. The next second I'm looking at the camera, the information is changing. So my consciousness is changing. That's quite neuroscientific. Moving on, there's also another Sufi story or a joke which is related to guilt and how liabilities and how we try to carry it all around. Once there was Mullah Naseeruddin, who lived in Afghanistan and Iran, and once he came to India. And well, he came to India, there was some very red fruit that someone was selling by the side of the street. And Mullah Naseeruddin found that very pleasant to look. So Mullah Naseeruddin thought, well, this must be very sweet and very good to taste. So what Mullah did was, all the gold coins he had, because Mullah Naseeruddin is the Sufi fool, he bought the entire shop. When Mullah ate the first bite, he could not believe it. It was chilies. And wait, here's the best part of the story. The people that accompanied Mullah from his travel were coming from the back, and they saw Mullah eating chilies after chilies, although tears are coming from his eyes, and his eyes is red, and his face is red, and his ears are red, and he's almost shaking with all those spicy and the hotness of the chilies. And they asked Mullah, they said, Mullah, what are you doing? And why are you eating chilies? And Mullah said, I'm not eating chilies, I'm eating my own investment. So that's how we, a lot of times, tend to, just lift all our liabilities and past commitments in our lives. Just because we invested a lot of time and efforts, well, now we have to be with it until we are able to level our scores. Another story that I have always loved is the story of 3 people this is also a story Buddha narrated. So this story is about 3 people, or 3 fools, you can say. So once these 3 people wanted to cross the river, and they had no way to cross the river. And well, they found a boat with them. So it was great and they were able to cross the river. But as soon as they came on the other side, in place of keeping the boat in the river or letting the boat stay in the river, they lifted the boat and they started walking with it in their travels until they came to a village where people were asking them, what's up with the boat that you guys are lifting? It seems too heavy and you've had a long journey and it seems it's making you too much slower. And they said, well, this boat helped us at the time we need it, so we cannot just let it go away. We cannot throw it just like that in the river. We need to take it with us. It's quite a valuable thing. And Buddha asked his monks, he said, Bhikkhus, what do you think was the thing? Did they do the right thing? Do you think they could have just kept the boat in the river and it would have been better for other people to cross the river just like they did? Well, that's how things are. Whenever you find something that helps you, something that's very supportive of you at some point of time, well, it has its own end, and there comes a point where you have to say goodbye to the things. And that is the way to go forward and have a nice journey and not lift the boat even after you have been able to cross the river. And the Zen people have interesting metaphors too, to help us understand how things are temporary, and so should be our psychology and our mind. So this is a Zen saying: when the wind blows, the bamboo bends. When the wind is gone, the bamboo makes no sound. A wild goose crosses a wintry lake, and when it departs, the lake leaves no trace. You have to be a mirror. You have to be completely naked. You have to be completely unconditioned and unclinging to things. I mean, clinging to things is the reason why suffering exists. If we just let nature takes its own course, if we just let things be our guest, and if we just try to be a good host and let them go whenever they want to, well, then we will save ourselves from so much suffering and so much pain and guilt and shame and all those things. It's such a simple thing. And just to remind you again, I'm not saying that if your ego does bring up those things, you have to create this sort of dual conflict between yourselves. You have to recognize the ego, and you have to have that loving recognition, have the aha moment where whenever ego tries to bring up something that cringes you, that makes you feel sad, that makes you feel a bit pained about what happened, well, you just recognize it and you understand that the ego is doing it because it has an evolutionary basis. So that's pretty much it. I hope I was able to share some interesting things with you, and I hope that this helps someone someday, and I'll see you in the next video.